us. Look at all those experienced people who took us into Iraq. Look at all those experienced people who kept us in Afghanistan 20 years too long. Look at all those experienced people who have not raised them.
I agree with you, but also look at Donald Trump. That's the guy, that's the last person we had, and he had no experience.
So Marianne Williamson, who is running to become the Democratic nominee for president. It's a tough road with Biden as an incumbent, but regardless, she was on Mehdi Hasan's show on MSNBC, and I have not seen this yet, but I want to watch this through with you and show you how she did. I'm curious because we're talking about a network and I should say a host in Mehdi Hasan, who is probably the best host that MSNBC has in terms of someone who is more forward-thinking, more focused on the rights of workers, human rights generally. And Marianne Williamson's platform is very pro that. It's essentially the Bernie Sanders platform that she has taken on. But when you combine that with a campaign that has very little chance simply because of the fact that Biden is the current president, this is not like 2016 when Obama was, leaving. We're talking about someone who is current president and challengers to him. So I'm curious how Mehdi Hasan is going to, juggle those two things in this interview. But let's check this out.
Williamson recently laid out what she calls an economic bill of rights, which runs to the left of President Biden's economic policies and includes the right to a job that pays a living wage and universal quality health care. But given she can't win, why is she running? Marianne Williamson joins me now all the way from London. Marianne Williamson, thank you so much for coming on the show. I know it's late where you are. Let's start with an obvious question. Why are you running against Joe Biden? Why do you believe he does not deserve a second term as a Democratic president?
You said a couple of things tonight that were interesting. You said, well, he has given more investment in green energy in the Inflation Reduction Act than had ever been done. Yeah, but he also approved the Willow Project, which completely nullifies those investments. He's also given more oil drilling permits even than Trump did. So this idea that he's done more investment in green energy, please let's not pretend this is the great.
By the way, if you're curious about the Willow Project, I did a video on that when that whole thing went through. Just search Willow Project or Willow on my channel, and you will find it.
Climate change president. You also mentioned that he cut child poverty in half. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, he did with the child tax credit. And guess what? 6 months after they did it, it expired and they didn't bother to permanentize it. So there are a lot of ways in which the president has said that he would do things. He's made some incremental changes. I don't want to not give him credit where credit is due, although you did just now.
So what do you say to those who point out that, yes, you are popular with younger voters and on TikTok, but you can't win a Democratic presidential primary? You're essentially a spoiler candidate. And so by primarying Biden, all you're doing is weakening him in the general and making it easier for a Republican to beat him in 2024 in what will be a very tight election.
Well, there are two things about what you said. First of all, you said I'm a spoiler candidate. I'm not a spoiler candidate. I'm running in a primary. So you can't be a spoiler if you're running in the primary.
That's right. She's right. Like, Mehdi Hasan's a smart guy. I'm not sure why he would call her a spoiler candidate. What's she going to spoil? It's a primary. You can't, you're not, what are you spoiling? They're all Democrats and it's a primary and Biden's the president. Again, maybe it's possible Marianne can win a state. I don't think so, but regardless, you're not spoiling anybody. It's a very bizarre comment from Mehdi Hasan there.
The second thing you said was this narrative, you can't win. Isn't that what people said about Donald Trump? I will win if people vote for me. I believe that in a democracy, people should have as wide an array of options before them as there are candidates running on agendas. That's what a democracy is. We need to protect our democracy right now. That's obvious to everyone. The way you protect your democracy is by using your democracy. Candidate suppression is a form of voter suppression. So this idea that I'm a spoiler, no, I'm not a spoiler. I'm a candidate in a primary, and it's very important, I believe, that the president debate me, that the president debate any other people who are challenging him. At a time like this, when the fascists are clearly at the door, we should be having a very serious conversation about what it will take to defeat them, and not just accepting what the DNC has to say because a few elites have decided it's going to be Joe Biden.
All right. Her point there about wanting a debate and and wanting to be in this discussion. There are a lot of people who think Marianne Williamson is dishonest in her intentions and that she is running to, sell books, to raise her profile. And my point is, even if that is true, and that may be true, I don't know. I don't know Marianne Williamson personally, so I don't know what her intentions are. But what matters is the output. In terms of this discussion, in terms of this whole debate, what matters is what is she saying, and are those issues being discussed in a public forum? Her intentions ultimately here do not matter if she does the right thing, if she says the correct things, if she props up the right issues. Let's say, for example, Bernie Sanders, who is the most genuine politician I've ever, in terms of national politics, I've ever seen. But let's pretend Bernie Sanders is fighting for higher wages, for healthcare for all, because he likes to see his name in headlines. Let's say that's why he's doing it, because he wants to be famous in his latter years. Okay. Does it matter if you still get healthcare, if your wages still go up, if corporations still get taxed? Why do intentions matter there? They don't matter. So while it would be nice that if every single person was genuine that was running for public office, which is definitely not true, while it would be nice if that was the case, what ultimately matters is what your output is. This is also why it doesn't matter whether or not Trump is personally racist in his, behind closed doors and what he says, because what he outputs is racism. Same with DeSantis. What they output is bigotry and racism. It doesn't matter if in their own minds they are wonderful people. They're kind to their families. That doesn't matter. What matters when you are a public figure with a platform and power, what matters is how you use that platform and that power. So the same case here in this race. Williamson's intentions here do not matter. What matters is what she is saying and what she is platforming.
So I agree, Marianne, with your analysis, and I agree with a lot of the policies that you're outlining. The issue is, I guess, you. And you mentioned Donald Trump. I spent a lot of time on this show referring to Donald Trump as the former reality TV star, not just to be snarky, but also to remind people that he had no business running for president. He had zero experience, zero qualifications. And with respect, doesn't the same apply to you? I mean, I may agree with a lot of your policies, but that doesn't mean that you, Marianne Williamson, self-help author, best-selling author, former spiritual advisor to Oprah Winfrey, are qualified to lead the country, to be commander-in-chief, to run the federal government, to have your finger on the nuclear button. Doesn't experience matter?
Before we get to her answer here, she's not going to be president. So this is a discussion that I'm, it's hard to know how to frame this, because on one hand, Mehdi Hasan is saying you can't win. On the other, he's saying, are you ready to be president because you're just a best-selling author? Is that enough to be president? You can't have both, right? Either you think she can win and you don't think she's qualified enough to be president because she's just an author, or she can't win and she's using this platform to simply spread this message and try and bring these discussions, these policies into the conversation in some way. So it's either or, right? You can't have it both ways. So, which is why I'm of the perspective that she can't win, because Biden is current sitting president running again. Incumbency is incredibly powerful. She's polling currently under Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's at 20%. And it's not because he's popular. It's because his last name is Kennedy, and he's an alternative to Joe Biden. People, I'm making an assumption here, but I think it's a fair assumption that most people don't actually know much about Kennedy and don't know that he is incredibly anti-vax, anti-science. He has been recently buddying up with some conservative donors, some right-wing donors. I would bet that most people answering Kennedy in polls are simply saying that because they don't want Biden again, not because they really love Kennedy. So it's just, I feel like you have to kind of pick a lane here if you're going to criticize her. But his job as a journalist as well is to kind of explore all avenues. It's not really, I guess his job to pick a lane in this situation. But I think it's important to be clear that if she can't win, then it's weird to criticize her for not being ready to be president if you know that she can't win.
Yeah. Well, let's look at what those experienced people have done for us. Look at all those experienced people who took us into Iraq. Look at all those experienced people who kept us in Afghanistan 20 years too long. Look at all those experienced people who have not raised them.
I agree with you, but also look at Donald Trump. That's the guy, that's the last person we had, and he had no experience.
Donald Trump's problem as president was not that he had not been in politics. It's the nature of his character. If Donald Trump had had a different kind of person who surrounded him, Donald Trump would have been a different kind of president. And, you know, the founders did not say that in order to run for president, you had to have had political experience, because they were leaving it to every generation to determine for itself. What are the qualifications for a leader at this time? My qualifications are that I've been around enough to see how this country operates. I've been around the very rich and the very powerful. I've been around the very disadvantaged, do not have money, do not have power. Okay. And I've seen how this country operates. I've seen it up close. And I am in this candidacy saying what everybody knows. This society is rigged at this point. This society is not even operating as a real democracy. We have already moved into the area of oligarchy, whether it's oil companies or defense contractors, insurance companies, big pharmaceutical companies. They run this country, Mehdi, and you know it. I've heard you say it.
And I said to you, I agree with you on a lot of the policy stuff. But let's talk about you again. You mentioned character. Politico in March interviewed 12 of your 2020 campaign staffers who painted a picture, quote, of a boss who can be verbally and emotionally abusive. All 12 former staffers said you screamed at people till they cried. 3 said you threw phones at your staffers. You've denied all those allegations, I know, called them categorically untrue. And yet last weekend, your deputy campaign manager resigned, and then your campaign manager resigned back to back. Why is it, Marianne, that so many of the people who work for you don't seem to like working for you?
Well, how come so many do, number one? Number two, I've never thrown a phone, okay? Have I raised my voice? Absolutely.
Just to be clear, yes or no, will you support the Democratic presidential candidate in 2024, whoever it is, against the Republican candidate, whoever that is? Yes or no?
You know, Washington, in his farewell address, warned us about political parties because he said people could be more into their supporting their factions than their country. I will support my country. I will do everything I can to keep a fascist out of the White House. But I agree with Franklin Roosevelt. We will not have to worry about a fascist takeover in this country as long as democracy delivers on its promises. Democracy, it's not delivering on its promises. I will do whatever I can to help the American people vote for an agenda by which democracy will deliver on its promises. That's the way to keep a fascist out of the White House.
I think Marianne Williamson absolutely will endorse Joe Biden. Why wouldn't she? I don't think it wouldn't benefit her personally to not do that. But also, I do think that she ultimately does care. Whether or not, again, about her intentions, who knows? But in terms of, getting rid of a fascist or preventing a new one from coming in, I do think Marianne Williamson is genuine in that. And she endorsed Biden last time. So, why wouldn't she do that now? But I don't know. I think that was a fairly fair interview. Brought up all sorts of issues, including some workplace problems that it's hard to know how to comment on that stuff without being there and knowing those people and all that. Of course, it doesn't sound good, and all these people quit and talk about it being kind of a crazy place to work. But her argument is, hey, more people have worked for me or are working for me than have left, which I guess is also a fair argument. So whatever. I'm more concerned about how she's using her platform and how she would use it if she did gain any kind of power. And I think, regardless of any intentions there, I do think that ultimately she would do the right thing if she had power. But she doesn't. And it's very, very unlikely that she will, based on how primaries work during a time when you have an incumbent Democratic president. So it's going to be less of a fun race, this one is, because you're not going to see debates. The DNC is not going to have any open debates around the primary here, which I do think is I mean, it's clearly anti-democratic, but from their position, yeah, that's like, it's not at all surprising. So I can't pretend that's like news that they're not going to have debates. Have they had debates in the past during incumbent challenges? I don't. Maybe decades ago, but not recently. So that's not surprising either. But I don't know. It's Marianne Williamson's relevance in this primary depends completely on whether or not the media actually covers her. So this interview is good for her. It's having any kind of interview for Marianne Williamson is a positive for her, because this is all she really has to go on is this kind of attention, because otherwise this entire campaign is completely irrelevant.